o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago, and our next conversation is one that has been a hot topic, speaking about Stand Your Ground. Joining us this morning is Dr. Randy Seepersad, criminologist, to unpack the debate. Good morning, Dr. Seepersad, and welcome.
Hi, good morning, and thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show this morning. Let's get straight into the conversation. Dr. Seepersad, to start us off, please explain exactly what the Stand Your Ground is for those who don't know.
Right, so stand your ground legislation is something that fundamentally changes the powers that citizens have to defend themselves. Under traditional laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed many jurisdictions, one of the features is that you have the responsibility to retreat, from an assailant should you be attacked. Understand your ground legislation, that requirement is removed. So it means that somebody who stands up, so to speak, and defends themselves would not necessarily end up being charged with assault or murder should they end up harming somebody who is an assailant, who, for instance, a criminal who tried to cause them harm. So one feature firstly is that you're able to quite literally stand your ground if you believe that someone is a credible threat to you. The other has to do with the location. Under traditional self-defense laws, you only have the requirement to protect yourself adequately if it is somewhere that is considered to be a personal space, such as, for instance, in your home. Now, stand your ground legislation could considerably widen that to anywhere that you legitimately have a right to be, for instance, within your vehicle or even in a public space. And it all depends on how the law is configured. The third characteristic has to do with the use of force. Under traditional self-defense laws, you have to use force that is proportionate to the force that is being applied to you, meaning just sufficient to repel the attack, but not necessarily stop the attacker. Understand your ground legislation, a citizen can be empowered once they believe that there is a reasonable threat to their life or safety to use force, including up to the use of deadly force. And again, that is something that legislators have to give careful thought to when crafting the legislation in terms of determining things like the amount of force that could be used, the locations, etc. So in a nutshell, stand your ground legislation really give citizens the ability to adequately protect themselves should a perpetrator choose to take action against them.
Dr. Seepersad, now that we have the basics of the Stand Your Ground laws, what's your position on this itself? Do you think that it may impact Trinidad and Tobago positively?
I'm cautiously optimistic, and I will tell you why that is so. I've looked at research around the world on stand your ground legislation, and primarily that research is based in the United States. And unfortunately, what that research shows is that stand your ground legislation is actually associated with an increase rather than a decrease in homicide rates, including firearm rates. If you look at other places in the world, like the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, the Czech Republic, you will see that there is research which is similar, but then at the same time, those jurisdictions have elements of stand your ground legislation in place, but not the full range of stand your ground legislation. So, in a sense, you can say that the other countries in which research has been conducted do not fully have stand your ground legislation. And as I said, in the United States, the problem is that the research overwhelmingly shows that stand your ground legislation has been associated with an increase rather than a decrease in homicides. Now, I mentioned that I'm cautiously optimistic. What sets a country like the United States apart from Trinidad and Tobago is the wide firearm ownership. And in a context where citizens can easily hold firearms, it means that if an altercation should occur or somebody should be attacked by an assailant, a firearm is quickly and usually brought into the picture. And when firearms are used, they quite often result in deaths. So you will find that When people attempt to defend themselves, they use firearms and assailants are quite often killed. And in that context, you would find that the homicide rate tends to increase. Now, Trinidad and Tobago is fundamentally different in that we do not have that wide firearm ownership. It means that, and it suggests to me that if properly used and if the public is properly educated about their rights under stand your ground legislation, it should have the impact of empowering citizens to properly defend themselves. And it should as well create a greater deterrent effect for the criminal element. Notwithstanding, I will say that something like this can also encourage the criminal element to become even more deadly in their pursuit of what they're trying to get. So the criminal element, in turn, could potentially also use more force against citizens if citizens are empowered to protect themselves. But I would say, for me at least, that citizens in Trinidad and Tobago do need to be empowered to adequately protect themselves.
Aside from what you would have just mentioned, Dr. Seepersad, in your experience as a criminologist, how do you see this affecting the everyday life of citizens and criminals?
I think it actually would have an impact, but I think we do need, on the citizen side, to empower citizens by educating them. It wouldn't be sufficient to simply put the laws in place. We need to educate citizens so that they know what their rights are and they know the limits that allow the law to be applied in self-defense cases. This is really important so that citizens do not misconstrue the laws and put themselves in an unfortunate situation where they defend themselves and then end up with a murder charge. A simple example could be the locations in which the laws apply. In some countries, for instance, any public space, including a mall, a park, or what have you, will be applicable. It may not be so in Trinidad and Tobago, and we await the legislation to see. I've heard talk of your home, your vehicle, etc., as locations. So citizens must know what locations are important, how far they can go in terms of the force, what is considered a situation that is reasonable to apply force, etc. With that, citizens are empowered to properly defend themselves. I suspect that on the side of criminals, this should create a deterrent effect because it means now that citizens are better protected. Under the current laws, citizens really have to be very, very fearful of trying to defend themselves because they can defend themselves in a particular situation and quite justifiably so, and still end up with an assault charge or even a murder charge under current self-defense laws. So I think that overall, we could actually have a very positive impact.
Now, we're hearing the positive impact, but we've also heard a little bit of, let's say, the negatives coming out of studies internationally. So as it stands right now, from what you've seen here on the ground in Trinidad and Tobago, what are the most compelling arguments for and also against this stand your ground legislation?
Right. So in terms of four, I would say that, citizens are extremely fearful. The crime rates have certainly gone out of control. And I dare say that survey after survey, and I'm talking about national crime victimization surveys, have shown that the crime rates are considerably higher than those indicated in official police statistics. So it means that with stand your ground legislation, citizens are empowered to adequately protect themselves. The negative, of course, is that the laws could be misapplied. Meaning, as I said before, if citizens do not understand the applicability of the laws and the situations under which the laws apply and what they can and cannot do and when they can and when they cannot act, then the laws will be misapplied and it could result in innocent citizens being wrongly convicted of charges when they try to defend themselves. So it means, of course, and it certainly suggests to me the need for education of the public. It's not enough to put a law like this in place that affects every citizen of the country without adequately educating them via public education campaigns or even in schools about what the laws mean. Because quite frankly, people don't go and download the laws and read them. they're very technical in nature. People don't understand the language and the terminology and all of that. So you need to simplify it. And you need to explain it to the public so that both the public as well as criminals understand what the legislation implies.
Dr. Seepersad, the misapplication of the law, and let's say as of now, a grey area when it comes to reasonable force, definitely could raise a lot of red flags for individuals. Could it also make prosecution and policing more challenging?
It could potentially, but at the same time, it could potentially simplify things. I would say that the situation as it is already very challenging. And if you take a simple example, the whole issue of proportionality or even the issue of imminence, both of which have to be met under current self-defense laws. Proportionality has to do with applying a force that is proportional to the threat that is perceived and the force that is being used, so that you can simply repel a person but not necessarily effectively stop them. And that creates a problem. Let us take, for instance, a domestic violence case. If a woman awaits a situation where a would-be attacker attacks her, meaning that the attack is imminent or the attack is ongoing, would she be able to apply proportionate force? Chances are she would not under such circumstances, right? So it's very, very difficult to determine whether one, an attack was really genuinely about to happen, because you cannot sometimes determine what is the intention of a person, even though they may have certain implements like weapons with them, etc. You have to prove that in a court of law to apply self-defense. You also have to prove that the force that you used was no more than force that was proportional to the force that the would-be attacker would have applied. Those are very, very difficult things to actually, negotiate within a court of law in a satisfactory way. But if you put stand your ground legislation in place and you say, if there is a credible threat to your safety or your life, and you define it in a certain way that it means very clear and specific things, and you say that when those conditions apply at certain locations, for instance, your home or your car, then you have the ability to defend yourself with force, including up to the use of legal force. Then it clears the way for citizens to protect themselves by any means necessary. That might sound harsh, and as I said, there could be potential problems, but it actually may simplify the legislative process when it comes to dealing with self-defense issues.
And before we get ready to wrap our conversations, do you have any recommendations for safeguards to prevent misuse?
I would say we need to think carefully in crafting the legislation about the conditions under which the stand your ground legislation applies. So it's not the case that you would just put a blanket use of force, including deadly force, and not be specific in terms of locations, in terms of circumstances, in terms of what constitutes a threat and how we can objectively judge that and all of that. So we need to think very, very carefully about how we craft the laws. The government should engage in some kind of public consultation, which indeed they are currently doing, with respect to those laws that they propose. They should talk to not just citizens, but also legislators, police officers, etc. Not only that, they need to also think about the implications for firearm ownership. I say this in the context that there has been discussion about the widening of firearm ownership. I see that as a good thing, in fact. But I would say that we still need a lot of caution. And the cautionary note that I would put is that we need to very carefully vet persons who will own firearms. So we need to do things like psychometric testing, polygraph testing, drug testing, criminal background testing, etc., to ensure that if you put a licensed firearms in the hand of somebody, that it will be used responsibly and only in the right circumstances.
Dr. Seepersad, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's been a pleasure to have you. Have a wonderful day.
You too, and thank you.
Dr. Randy Seepersad, criminologist, joining us this morning to give us some insight onto the Stand Your Ground legislation that is currently in discussion. Stay tuned. There's more coming up after this break.
It is 10 guns on me gun.